because then they would have lost their law license. He would have been out of the DA's office. But if you roll the dice, maybe you will get a not guilty verdict, and that's what they're hoping for today. But it's got to be a tense time as they wait for this verdict to come down.
It has to be. And Eric, we're communicating with David Hammer right now. He's the one who's actually in the courtroom, and he just told us that Jason Williams and Nicole Burdett are in their seats, and they should be delivering the verdict any moment now.
All right, yeah, so we'll be waiting with everybody else. And it does take a few minutes. I mean, it seems like when the verdict comes down, it happens automatically. But they've got to get everybody in the courtroom, get the jury back in, and then the verdict is read. And we're talking about 20 counts, 10 for each of the defendants.
Right. I mean, there's 10 that they're considering for both of them together. So the Jason Williams and Nicole Burdett are, both involved in the 10 counts that involve tax fraud. This is for failing to file cash payments, for filing fraudulent returns. And the prosecutors over the last week and a half have been showing the jurors tax document after tax document, showing all of the improper deductions. And it's been interesting because the defense attorneys have admitted, like, yes, there are some things wrong on here, but what you have to prove is that they did this willfully, that they intentionally lied on their taxes. So the big one that it's going to be interesting to hear is whether they are found guilty in the conspiracy charge, the conspiracy to defraud the government. And so that will basically say, like, yes, we believe that this was intentional, that they conspired with their tax preparer, Henry Timothy, to defraud the government and basically save, hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes.
And a lot of people were surprised when the defense rested their case without presenting a single witness, without having Burdett or Williams take the stand. They said that that the prosecution had a weak case, but the prosecutors said that the tax documents, the tax records, speak for themselves. They said that was the star witness.
Right. And that was a big question I think all of us had is, will Jason Williams actually take the stand? I mean, we didn't really know, and we don't know if he was considering it and that maybe the defense attorneys just thought, well, we don't need you to because we don't think the government had a strong enough case, or whether they didn't plan on calling anyone in the first place. But Nicole Burdett, Jason Williams, neither of them took the stand. The defense did not call any witnesses, and that is the first thing they said, was that we just don't believe their case is strong enough. We don't think they've proven beyond a reasonable doubt that they did this intentionally and willfully, and so they didn't call anyone, including the defendants themselves.
And Mike Pearlstein is here on the set with me, and you've covered so many of these trials, Mike, as we all have. I mean, it's a very complicated case. We're talking about tax documents that, for most of us, we have a hard time doing our own taxes, much less judging somebody on theirs.
Well, it's been an interesting case in that some of the minutia of the tax returns themselves were presented in court, probably more, complicated than the jury will actually use. You find that often when you talk to jurors, after a verdict, they often rely on just basic gut instinct and common sense. And obviously, Jason Williams, Nicole Burdett, and their defense team are counting on that common sense kicking in on reasonable doubt.
And if nothing else, it takes a unanimous verdict by all 12 jurors in each of the counts.
Right.
So, and it's hard to get 12 people to agree on anything.
Correct. Now, there certainly are enough counts which would be opportunities for that panel of 12 jurors to come to a consensus on one. Now, that unanimity has to be for acquittal as well as for conviction. Now, if they are unable to come to a consensus, and it doesn't quite look like that, because usually you have a jury come.
If it was a hung jury, we'd have heard it was a hung. They're hung.
They would approach the judge and say, what happens if we're deadlocked? That did not happen. So it does appear that as they've gone down that checklist of all of the responsive verdicts, that they have come to some sort of consensus, as you said, unanimous on at least some of those counts, whether it be acquittal or conviction. Now, I will say that, the defense was certainly counting on being able to find, at least one juror to have reasonable doubt, and the way they kind of focused their defense on Henry Timothy, the tax preparer, himself having, pled guilty to cheating on his own taxes. That seemed to be, really what the case boils down to. Now, on the flip side, I know the prosecution was trying to just bring in that any,
anybody could look at these records and see,
intelligent adult, and especially someone like a Jason Williams or Nicole Burdett, trained attorneys, would know that, things like health club memberships and Mardi Gras dues don't fall under, business expenses. That sort of common sense, like that's clearly, you sign your name on your tax forms.
All right.
And you're supposed to know what's contained in them.
All right, let's get back out to the courthouse. Former U.S. Attorney Harry Rosenberg is joining Erica right now. And I had asked Dean Cialino this morning, Dane Cialino rather, this morning, if it was anything that the jurors might wonder if a guy or people in the economic status or tax bracket that Burdett and Williams were in, would they have left reputable CPA firm to go to some guy's house in Bridge City? And he said, people are always looking for a cheaper way out.
Right. Right. Well, that's a good question, and I'll kind of address that a little bit with Mr. Rosenberg. And I know we're still waiting on a verdict, and it's gonna be interesting to hear your perspective once we actually learn what the jurors have decided. But we have Eric Polson in the studio, and he was kind of talking about, why would Jason Williams and Nicole Burdett have left the CPA they did have and gone to Henry Timothy in the first place. I mean, he's proven that he's not actually a CPA, and just someone, they're both clearly intelligent people who've gone to law school, they're attorneys. I mean, do you think that was enough to prove to the jury that they did this intentionally?
I don't think just, with all due respect to Eric, I don't think just changing CPAs is enough to prove intent, which is what the government must prove in this kind of case. They've got to prove they intended to violate tax law, criminal law, and the question is, what is the jury going to conclude as to whether that intent was established?
All right, well, thank you. And we know the jury is apparently now entering the courtroom, and I'm following David Hammer's tweets as we speak as well. He said that Nicole Burdett has been holding her hands in a prayerful position in front of her face as Jason Williams has been sitting quietly looking ahead, just waiting for the verdict to be delivered. Those jurors are entering the courtroom right now as we speak, and again, they will have to go count by count to tell us whether it is guilty or not guilty, and they could find him guilty on some of the counts, not guilty on some of the other counts. So it'll be interesting to hear what the jurors finally decided. But any of these counts, it sounds like Jason Williams would lose his seat as district attorney, possibly lose his license to practice law if even found guilty on one of the 10 that he is facing. And so the jury is now entering the courtroom. We are waiting for the verdict to be read.
And you can imagine what Burdett and Williams are going through right now, because I mean it's a time. I mean, we're sitting here now. You can kind of feel the tension among all of us.
Oh, this is the nervous time when the jury knows what they have decided, but nobody else does. Not even the judge at this point.
Not till they hand it over. Yeah.
Exactly. And then all of the parties must be present in court before that foreperson of the jury hands their decision, usually to the clerk.
Yeah. And again, it's count by count by count.
And they go through every count. I will say that, having covered many of these trials, and I'm sure you have as well, both sides try to look at the jurors and the expressions on their faces.
Trying to read the jury.
Trying to read. And I got to tell you, it's amazing how jurors can really, have an incredible poker face amid the tension that doesn't really reveal what they have decided.
Yeah.
They often, it's considered a bad sign if they don't want to make eye contact with the defendant or the defense team. But not always. Sometimes they're just playing it straight, taking their roles as jurors very, very seriously.
And if you've ever been in Judge Lance Afric's courtroom, he runs a very tight courtroom.
Oh, absolutely. No, he's a stickler for protocol and detail. And even when the jury is seated, look for them to be looking at the judge, not giving the signal that I know both sides are going to be looking for on what they've decided.
And Erica, you're in communication with David Hammer, who is inside the courtroom. He'll be sending us information, to keep us apprised on what's going on. The reason, there's no camera there are no microphones there, so it's the old school where it used to be people running out. At least we can do it by text messages.
And David Hammer said that Judge Lance Afric has taken the bench, so any moment now we will learn the verdict, and they will read them off one by one, count by count, and we will learn what the jury has decided after seriously considering this. It's day 3 of deliberation, and of course they had a lot of very complicated testimonies and documents to look at, so they've finally reached a verdict, and again, it has to be unanimous. So they have had to all agree on what the fate of Jason Williams will be.
And because we have not heard any talk, Mike, of a hung jury, it does seem that they have made an agreement on all 20 counts, 10 for each of them.
And that's why it has stretched into what is sort of the beginning of the kind of third day of deliberations.
And just not to interrupt, but we kind of think that it's been a long time, but for a case this involved, I mean, we've seen other white-collar cases like this go for days of deliberation.
But on the one hand, you give the prosecution credit. They could have gotten bogged down in like really intricate, tax form detail.
Well, then you might lose the jury.
Then you lose their interest. The other thing that the attorneys on both sides want to do is to just, get the kind of the favor of the jurors to actually have confidence in them. It gives them those persuasive powers when it comes down to those final arguments.
Yeah, and it does depend on, you're saying, how a lawyer presents the case to the jury, and they do face the jury. They look at the jury. They try to make some kind of contact with them.
Right, and there were such polar opposite interpretations of what happened here. Now, like clearly we know the defense was, all of the blame is on who we know is a corrupt tax preparer. He's pleaded guilty, and not only in his own case, but you had other people who were in Williams' law firm who pleaded to their own, tax fraud counts because of the going to this Henry Timothy to prepare their taxes. Was that enough? Was that enough to overcome what is, I guess, the prosecution appealed to basic common sense that clearly certain types of charges are not deductible?
Let's go back to Erica. Erica, what do you have for us?
It sounds like they read the decision for Nicole Burdett first. They found Burdett was facing those charges alone, in addition to the charges with Jason Williams, and she was found guilty on all 4 counts. We are getting these tweets from David Hammer, who is inside the courtroom. We're still waiting for the verdict to be read for the 10-count indictment that Jason Williams and Nicole Burdett faced together.
Harry's still with you?
And to kind of go. I'm sorry, what was that?
Is Harry Rosenberg still with you?
He is here. We're gonna grab him in just a second as soon as he gets a break. He's a very popular guy right now, so we're gonna get him in a second. But basically,
I was wondering I'm sorry to keep butting in, and we have a delay too. I was kind of wondering what his thoughts would be.
No, it's okay. Can you hear me? We have another verdict. Jason Williams and Nicole Burdett on the conspiracy count, they were found not guilty.
Okay.
And that was the one that basically would mean that Jason Williams and Nicole Burdett had this big conspiracy to defraud the government, that they did this all on purpose. And the defense had basically argued that there was not enough proof, that they did not have documents that proved that they did this intentionally and willfully, and they were found not guilty on the conspiracy count. So 2 counts against Williams, not guilty. This is, count 2 against Williams. This was one of the counts for for falsifying his tax returns, and he has different counts for each year. So this would have been for 2013, found not guilty of falsifying his tax returns. Count 3, 2014, falsifying his tax returns. David Hammer says he was found not guilty. Count 4, not guilty. So count 1, count 2, count 3, count 4, all not guilty.
Okay.
Count 5, not guilty. And we should have count 6 soon, which would be another count to falsify those tax returns, not guilty. And now the last 4 will be for failing to file cash payments over $10,000, and he had 4 counts for those. Those should be read off any moment now. But again, for the first 6 counts against Jason Williams, he was found not guilty. Count 7, failing to file cash receipts, not guilty. And so clearly the jurors did not believe that the prosecutors did enough to prove that he purposely falsified his taxes, that he purposely did not file any of his cash receipts. Count 7, count 8, not guilty. We have 2 more against Jason Williams, and those are again going to be cash receipts for additional years. Count 9, not guilty. And then the last one will be another failing to file cash receipts over $10,000. And that one is not guilty as well. So Jason Williams is innocent according to the jury. He was found not guilty on all counts, while Nicole Burdett was found guilty on her 4 counts. So this clearly means that the prosecutors did not do enough to convince the jury that Jason Williams intentionally falsified his taxes. We want to call in former U.S. Attorney Harry Rosenberg again. Jason Williams is not guilty. What do you think this means that the jury thought about the trial over the last week and a half?
Well, it was clear that the jury apparently thought that the government did not prove intent on the part of Jason Williams to commit any type of criminal tax fraud, and yet the jury conversely said and concluded that his co-defendant, Nicole Burdett, was found guilty on all 4 of those counts, which almost parallel the charges against Jason Williams. But yeah, he's a fellow who ought to be gone to church and thanking his lawyers for a heck of a defense.
The fact that he was not guilty on all counts, Jason Williams, we know, will be able to keep his seat as district attorney, which I know was on the line if he was found guilty for even one of these counts.
Absolutely. His not only his seat as district attorney, but his ability to practice law in the state of Louisiana was all on the line, and that's what this verdict allows him to do, is go back to the district attorney's office, continue his service as the elected official, and continue practicing law as an authorized licensed attorney.
And Nicole Burdett found guilty on 4 counts. She's was found guilty of reducing her tax burden by $130,000. What is it that you think made the jurors decide that she was guilty while Jason Williams was not?
I only wish I knew, because whether it was a compromise verdict or whether there was something about Jason Williams' demeanor or about his representation, it's hard to know. I wish I was in that jury deliberation room with my ears to the jurors' thinking, but it was almost a compromise verdict in the sense of guilty for Nicole Burdett, but not guilty across the board for Jason Williams.
So what does this mean for Nicole Burdett now?
What it means is that she's going to be faced with what they call the Office of Disciplinary Counsel, and likely to lose her license to practice law in the state of Louisiana.
And we know Jason Williams, while he was found not guilty on all these counts, he still owes money to the IRS. Even his defense attorneys were saying that he still, will have to pay his debt.
Yeah, I think that was a clever pitch by his defense counsel to tell the jury, look, he's not walking away from this tax obligation. He's still got to pay it. It's going to stay with him for a long time, but don't convict him of what these charges would bring.
The fact that it took the jurors 16 hours to finally come to a verdict, what do you think about that timeline? Is that, in your opinion, a short, long time, or is there really no way to even compare it to anything else?
It's hard to make that comparison, but given the fact that there were essentially 14 separate charges, 2 defendants, and you've got 12 jurors who all want to be heard to each other, so there's some dialogue among the jurors in their deliberations, as well as examining the jury instructions and the indictment. I don't think it was an inordinate amount of time for their deliberations.
And so David Hammer is telling us from inside the courtroom that Nicole Burdett, her sentencing was set for September 30th. He said she is sobbing at her table. Jason Williams, although who is not guilty, is holding his head and looking at Burdett. What do you take from that reaction by both defendants?
Well, you remember the two of them embraced right after the trial, so they were close. They've been close. They have not shot. They did not shoot at each other during the course of the trial. Jason Williams' lawyers didn't take pot shots at Nicole Burdett, and vice versa. They marched in sort of lockstep and stayed unified. And I'm sure Jason is going to continue to support Nicole Burdett, even with this verdict, which of course is still subject to appeal.
So what else does this mean for Jason Williams now? He will walk out this courtroom not guilty according to the jury, and he will, I guess, continue on as district attorney. And what else is next for him?
Absolutely. I don't know what's next for him, but he can go back to his office as district attorney. He can continue to practice law in the state of Louisiana, and he is going to take one big breath out today and hopefully have some quiet family time tonight.
This was a huge decision that the jury had to make, and based on what you've heard, does it sound like they really took their duty seriously? And I think the big question for people who have kind of been watching this trial is, did they make the right decision? But they're the ones who have been listening to witness testimony after witness testimony. They looked at all of the documents. So ultimately, it was up to that jury to decide. But that's going to be a question: is did they do the right thing? Did they make the right decision?
I have no doubt that there are people in this community who'll have differing views as to whether the verdict makes sense or does not make sense. But you're correct, Erica, that the jurors had the benefit of hearing the testimony directly, of looking at the documents, and then having that interchange among them to analyze where they should land. And they landed with not guilty across the board for Jason Williams, which was a huge victory for him and his defense counsel.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your input. And Jason Williams, it appears, is still in the courtroom. We are still kind of getting some inside details from David Hammer. He said just a minute ago that Jason Williams was hugging Nicole Burdett at her defense table, and they are going to be coming out of the court probably at any moment. And we do believe that Jason Williams will likely speak with us, give us his reaction and his thoughts to his verdict of not guilty. A jury found him not guilty after listening to a week and a half of testimony, looking at all of the tax documents, and even his defense attorney said, yes, there were issues with the tax documents, but the jury did not believe that he did this intentionally, that he was willfully trying to defraud the government, that he was trying to lie on his taxes. So it'll be interesting to hear his reaction coming out of all of this after obviously a very long week and a half.
Yeah, Erica, and it's kind of a stunning news for Jason Williams and for Nicole Burdett on the 4 counts she was convicted on. I think, a lot of people are saying, were these similar counts, but they were different counts?
Well, this was, these counts were specifically for Nicole Burdett. The first, have a fire truck passing. But the first 10 counts involved both her and Jason Williams, and the last 4 were specifically for her for, trying to reduce her tax burden by $130,000. And I guess the jurors found her guilty. Now it does look like Jason Williams may be coming out of the courtroom at any moment. We are getting ready to hear from him, possibly his attorneys, and we may even hear from prosecutors. But we have crews standing by, and we are in touch with them as we are hearing what's going on inside the courtroom, and we do believe that they are coming out at any moment, and Jason Williams is expected to give us his reaction. David Hammer also tells us that the U.S. Attorney is coming down to make a statement, and so we will hear their opinion. Of course, the prosecutors clearly did enough to prove that Nicole Burdett was guilty, but they did not prove that Jason Williams was guilty. So the jury did not believe that he did any of this intentionally and willfully. And of course, a lot of this has been surrounded around their tax preparer, Henry Timothy, and the prosecutors tried to prove that they purposely conspired with him to defraud their taxes. And so they do believe that Nicole Burdett was guilty of the 4 counts involving her. Jason Williams is walking out a free man.
And Erica, Jason Williams has said all along that he thought this was a political hit on him. This kind of justifies what he was saying, possibly,
And that was brought up a little bit during closing arguments as well. The prosecutors the defense attorneys tried to say that Henry Timothy was using Jason Williams to get off on his own charges, because of course he pled guilty to a count of lying on his taxes as well. And so the defense attorneys tried to say that Jason Williams was just someone that he threw at the government to try and get off and ask for some leniency. And he, even during his testimony, admitted that he was trying to get some leniency and had a plea deal. And so he testified against him as well. We have David Hammer here, and he's going to give us a little more in-depth perspective on what it was like inside that courtroom. David, you just came out of the courtroom. Jason Williams is not guilty. Tell me a little bit about his reaction, what it was like to see his face as that verdict was read off by the judge.
Well, Jason Williams was actually not demonstrably happy, because Nicole Burdett, his partner, was found guilty on all of her separate charges, all 4. And so he was actually crying along with her.
Wow.
Came over to her defense table, because there were 2 separate defense tables, came over, gave her a long hug. About a minute they were holding each other. He appeared to have been crying as well. She was sobbing audibly. So he seemed to be more focused on how distraught she was to have been found guilty. Her sentencing is set for September 30th. So, he knows his partner is going to prison most likely for her crime. So he was more focused on that. You didn't see any kind of excited or relief on his part. But then his family and friends who were gathered in the courtroom were hugging in relief afterwards, waiting outside, gathering outside, hugging each other in joy after the verdict found him not guilty on all of his counts.
Right. And David, I know you've been kind of covering this for a long time, and you've looked into, the background of both Jason Williams, Nicole Burdett, looked into the documents and the indictment. And what do you think it might have been that made the jury decide Nicole Burdett was guilty, but Jason Williams was not?
Well, it would be interesting to be able to look into their thought process, but we don't have that ability at this point, because it is interesting to see that as a separate thing, because she is essentially charged on her tax returns with having falsified these returns, and she played a role in the same charges being alleged against Jason Williams' tax returns. All of the charges against Jason Williams were against both him and her for the handling of his tax returns. So the fact that the jury came out of this thinking that she was guilty of doing that on her own tax returns, but not guilty guilty, because keep in mind, she was held not guilty of conspiring with him and of acting illegally on the benefit of his tax returns. That means that they saw her as acting independently of him. And so that's very interesting to see, because then when it came to his tax returns, and I think it's interesting to keep in mind that he is a public official and she is not. So they're obviously treating the charges against him with some additional scrutiny, some additional care, and if there's any doubt in their minds, which obviously there was, that he was guilty of any kind of crime that would remove him from office, that would be something that they needed to do. They needed to find him not guilty if there was any doubt in their mind.
And it was interesting to hear during the trial that Nicole Burdett, was admittedly kind of the middleman in a lot of this. They admitted that she prepared, or she kind of worked with Henry Timothy to prepare Jason Williams' taxes.
And she was communicating with Henry
Right.
Timothy about Jason Williams' personal taxes, because again, these were professional charges that were incurred by the firm, but that were being claimed on their personal taxes. So each of them were claiming those charges on their personal taxes as deductions, and that was the case here, where Jason Williams' personal taxes they found was not being done intentionally, and they found that it was being done intentionally by Nicole Burdett on her own tax returns.
And as his defense attorneys even said, he's still going to owe money to the IRS. He's not guilty of conspiring to do this intentionally and willfully, but he still will owe them money.
And again, keep in mind, not only do you have to prove intent on the conspiracy charge, which is the first count, but all the other 9 counts, they also had to prove intent. So if he was found to have not intentionally falsified any of those records, if he was found to not intentionally fail to report cash receipts of over $10,000 on those last 4 counts, he could not be found guilty, and that's what they determined. And it's the same with her. She was found not guilty as it related to his tax returns, but she was found guilty as it related to her tax returns.
Right. And so what does this mean for her now? I know she has her sentencing September 30th, and what could this mean for her?
Well, we're going to have to see what the sentencing guidelines are on those individual 4 counts. So I'm not exactly sure right now what those specific sentencing guidelines are, but it seems like in terms of the amount of money that we're talking about here, over $130,000 in taxes that she was able to avoid by doing those claims, that would bring potentially some jail time, some prison time. For Jason Williams, of course, he can go on now as the district attorney. He cannot be removed from office for this. He can go on as if nothing has happened in terms of his political career, unless the electors or the voters hold it against him in some future election.
Right. But he was found not guilty, and even one, he would have lost his seat as district attorney. Even one would have been a felony count.
That's right. By law, any felony count where he would have been convicted would have led to an automatic suspension, and then as soon as it became a final conviction, he would have been removed from office, and he would have been prevented from running for office again for at least 5 years after he finished out at whatever sentence he was given. So all of that now is off the table, no problem for him, at least as it relates to continuing as the district attorney of Orleans Parish.
What was the reaction? You talked a little bit about his reaction, and then his family, of course, was probably more excited. We know his wife's been in there from the beginning. Was she present as well as the verdict was
Yes,
present?
and everybody, it was interesting to see the dichotomy, because clearly you could tell, even though I didn't know who all these people were, you could tell who the people were who were attached to her and were part of her circle, and who the people were who were friends with him and were part of his family, because that's where you saw the different reactions. The tears of relief on the one hand, and audible sobs of distress on the other. And Nicole Burdett, going into the verdict, as we waited and we knew that the verdict was there, was ready, and the judge hadn't come in yet and the jury hadn't come in yet, she was sitting at her defense table with her hands clasped in a prayerful pose right in front of her face, bent over, eyes closed, appearing to be in prayer, concerned about how this was going to go. He was more kind of subdued, more just kind of staring off into space, waiting quietly. And then there was this sense of just incredible quiet as the room filled up, but nobody said a word. And then the jury was let in to take their seats. Then Judge Lance Afric took the stand and started reading those 4 charges against Burdett first. All 4 of them unanimously guilty. He went around and polled each juror by name to get their reaction, to get them to say, is this your verdict? Yes. Is this your verdict? Yes. And all through the 12, and they all found found her, Nicole Burdett, unanimously guilty on the 4 counts separately, and then both of them unanimously not guilty on the 10 counts facing both of them.
And what about the prosecutors? They clearly did enough to prove that Nicole Burdett was guilty and that she did this willfully, but they didn't do enough to prove that Jason Williams did. Did they have any reaction to the verdicts being read?
No reaction. They said that they would be making a statement to the media, but they then got off on the 3rd floor as we were all heading down in the elevator together. Ms. Hubinger said that the U.S. Attorney for the Western District would be making the statement to the media and reacting to this verdict, which is this long-awaited, very high-profile verdict in this case that's very important here in New Orleans. And you had prosecutors coming from outside because of the recusal of the local U.S. Attorney's Office to handle this case.
And what about Jason Williams? Of course, as the district attorney, I think people would expect and hope to hear from him. Did he give any intention or make it clear that he would be coming down and offering any sort of statement or saying anything to us?
He didn't, but we do have the U.S. Attorney from the Western District speaking now to the gathered media. We do have them speaking right now, so we'll be getting those comments, I'm sure, later. But no, he did not give any indication that he was going to be speaking because we were not given an opportunity to interact with him as of yet. We were told to leave the courtroom before he could finish.
In our system of government, people are innocent until proven guilty. Although we may not always agree with the jury, we respect the work that they've done in this case, and we're going to defer all of the comments until after Ms. Burdett's sentencing. Thank you.
What did Ms. Burdett broke down in court? Can you tell us about that?
All right. Yeah.
All right, and we just heard from the prosecutors. They did not. Yes, I can. And I know they didn't give us much of a statement. They, of course, acknowledged that they won the case in respect to Nicole Burdett, lost the case in respect to Jason Williams, but they did not give us too much of any indication as to how they are feeling, how they, what their reaction is following the verdict being read by the jury.
Well, Ms. Hubinger would probably have to be very disappointed because she, some of the criticism, I think, of the prosecutors in this case is that they didn't lay out an extremely strong case of intent through the course of this because they left it mostly in the hands of Henry Timothy, the tax preparer, and allowed the defense to say that this was him acting on his own without the knowledge of the 2 defendants. But then she came with and you were in the courtroom when she gave a very strong closing statement that left it in the minds of the jurors that, hey, maybe they were choosing this guy who was not a real CPA and was falsifying his own taxes and was a tax cheat on purpose to try to get out of this, and that was all part of their grand plan to avoid paying these taxes. And she left that clearly in the minds of the jurors because they took 16 hours to come up with this decision over the course of 3 days. So clearly they were thinking very long and hard about her closing statement there. But in the end, they just didn't feel like there was enough done there to show intent by Jason Williams. And again, I think that we have to acknowledge that there's going to be a higher standard placed on an elected official who would then be removed from office that the public elected to that office. That's a very, very high bar that you have to clear to prove that this person who the public selected to be their lead prosecutor in state matters should be removed from office.
And I think that was the challenge for the prosecutors prosecutors is proving that intent, because when they laid out all of these tax documents, I mean, we saw countless tax documents, and they showed us, this is what this one says, this is what this one says, but proving the intent is the challenge here.
Absolutely.
And it seems like they did that with Nicole Burdett. They proved that she was willful in this, but proving that Jason Williams intentionally also defrauded the government is going to be the big challenge. And in her closing argument, she was strong, and she did kind of lay out there, why would they go to this guy over the bridge, as they put it. They would say, why would they go over the bridge? Because he's from over on the West Bank, worked out of his house, and kind of laying that out there. What was the intent here? But we didn't hear as much of that throughout the trial. It was kind of in the closing arguments where I feel like they did focus a little more about what the intent would be with this. Whereas during the trial, we kind of just saw document after document, and you're going to lose the jury if you don't, try hard enough to make sure to keep their attention and explain to them what it is that we're really looking at. And that's a challenge. I mean, It's going to be a challenge. So when you're talking about tax documents, and a lot of people on the jury are, admittedly don't really know too much about how the tax documents, or how to file your tax documents, and kind of how all that works, what the law is. I mean, it's very complicated, and it was going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that she wanted the defense to walk into a trap where then she comes around on the back end and says, see, they intended this all along because they knew that this guy was a cheat, and they knew he was going to help them save money and alter their taxes that had been prepared for years by a real CPA, and then they go to a fake CPA and try to claim that they didn't know that he was a crook. But that obviously didn't work with the jury. The jury spent a long time looking at each individual count. It's clear from how long they went, and from the fact that they were asking for additional documents and for records that they knew Nicole Burdett had brought to Henry Timothy. And so that is as likely as any reason why they would have found her guilty of the charges specifically against her, and didn't see enough to find her and him guilty in the charges related to Jason Williams' specific tax returns.
Well, David, thank you. We're going to toss it back into the studio. Eric Paulson, I know, is standing by to kind of wrap us all up.
All right, Erica and David, thank you very much. We do have Loyola tax professor Bill Nielsen on the phone. Bill, can you give us your thoughts on this?
I think, first of all, you got to congratulate the attorney for Mr. Williams. He obviously did a great job, because he was able to show that there was no willfulness with regard to Mr. Williams and the way his tax returns were prepared. It's interesting to me that they didn't have, today with emails and text messages, they didn't have that with Mr. Williams and the return preparer, and I think that played a big part in this verdict.
And I have to imagine, I wasn't in the courtroom, but when they read the 4 guilty counts for Nicole Nicole Burdett on the separate charges, I mean, Jason Williams' heart must have dropped, thinking, "Oh no, it's going to happen to them too."
Yeah, well, that's true, but Nicole was the one that apparently interacted with the tax preparer, and I think that might have sunk her ship.
Yeah, and these were separate charges from the 10 that both of them were facing together.
Yes, and one was the preparation of his tax returns, and one was the preparation of hers.
And for all the time and money spent for the prosecution to because they do look at losses and wins, this is a big loss for the prosecution with Jason Williams, although they can claim at least some victory with the conviction of Nicole Burdett.
Yeah, but that wasn't the focus of this investigation. No. It was Mr. Williams for sure, and maybe they threw Nicole in there, hoping that maybe she pleaded and then would turn on Mr. Williams, which she didn't do. Yeah, it's a loss. And
you've got to wonder if going through her mind, because she's facing prison time now, and the loss of her law license. Maybe she should have cooperated. I don't know what's going through her head right now. Yeah,
she had excellent counsel for sure.
Sure.
And I just think that they made a trial decision and decided to go with it together, and it worked for Mr. Williams. It didn't work for Nicole.
And how hard is it, and how often does it happen where the government goes before a jury on a tax case like this? Because it's hard to prove these things in court.
Right, and that gets me back to the emails and text messages that were apparently not there between the return preparer and Mr. Williams or Nicole Burdett. You know, if you have your taxes prepared, you know, your CPA or your accountant is going to email you, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? What do you think of this? And usually email them back. They didn't seem to have that in this case, and I think that was a big benefit for Mr. Williams, and I think it was a detriment to Nicole.
Yeah, and are you surprised by what happened in court today?
No, because willfulness is very difficult. It's not an omission of income case. It's a deduction case. And I think it worked well for Mr. Williams by him not having much of any interaction with the return preparer.
But not so good for Nicole Burdett.
No.
All right, Bill Nielsen, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And we'll have a lot more coverage on the outcome of this trial. Hopefully we get some reaction from Jason Williams and possibly Nicole Burdett, but we'll wait and see on that. Actually, let's go back to our crew outside the courthouse. And Erica, I was talking about with Professor Nielsen about what it must have been like for Jason Williams when they read the 4 guilty verdicts for Nicole Burdett, and he's thinking, oh no, that doesn't look good.
Right, and David Hammer can talk a little bit to that. Is, you know, when they're reading these guilty verdicts off, but for Nicole Burdett first, which, you know, it's interesting that they did read hers first, because I feel like from the beginning we've been kind of going over the 10 first, and then they would read the final 4. So
Right.
I'm not sure if there was, you know, any.
Well, that's because he's the public official, he's the elected official, he's the one that we were all focused on. It was actually back in 2021 that they combined the 2 charges. The separate charges against her were then combined into this case. And as you noted, they handled this as a prosecution together. They made all of the claims together. They didn't separate it out for her. And so it's very interesting that the jury decided to split their decision, essentially, and say that she's guilty on the counts related to her tax returns, not guilty, along with him being not guilty on the charges related to his tax returns.
Right, and I know we are hoping to hear from Jason Williams. We're not sure if he's going to be coming down and giving an official statement at this point, or whether he's going to save and do that on a later date, but we are starting to see some reactions. We saw Helena Moreno tweeted just a minute ago saying proper and fair treatment was delivered by this jury. She said, I'm grateful that we can now continue to move forward on the important work ahead of us. As Jason Williams, now that he was found not guilty, he will head back into the DA's office and continue serving as district attorney of Orleans Parish.
It's interesting, too, to think about this, Erica. It's gotten a lot of national attention in the context of criminal justice reform DAs like the one in San Francisco who was recalled recently, others in the country that are in some trouble of their own. And Jason Williams has been lumped in there, saying that this is another criminal justice district reform district attorney who's in trouble and is facing these tax fraud charges. Now he's free and clear of that, and he can go ahead. And the question is, will his tactics as district attorney, looking to reduce sentences and looking to not go after as many of the lower level offenses, is that going to continue to be his method as, you know, crime issues take the fore and people criticize him for some of those positions?
Right, it'll be interesting, and I'm sure he's probably just ready to kind of move on from all of this and put it all behind him, but it'll be interesting to see as he steps back into his role as district attorney how it kind of all plays out.
And I spoke to former U.S. Attorney Harry Rosenberg about that specifically, and he said he thought he might get a good bump in his office from his assistant district attorneys there who might be energized by this, him coming back into the office triumphant and ready to go bring more cases. So that'll be interesting to see how that affects the work of the DA's office, which would have continued without him if he had been convicted.
All right, and let's head back into the studio with Eric Paulson.
All right, Erica, thank you very much. We do have our political analyst, Clancy Dubose, on the line. And you know, when this indictment first came down, Jason Williams did say he thought it was all political.
Yeah, I still don't think it was political. I just think the government did a really poor job of putting on its case, so poor that Jason Williams' lawyers, who are excellent lawyers, some of them former U.S. prosecutors, didn't feel the need to put on a case. They just argued after they cross-examined the government's so-called star witness, who was not much of a star witness, and the jury responded. But what puzzles me is the same thing that puzzled Harry Rosenberg, that for Mr. Williams to be found not guilty on all counts and for Nicole Burdett to then be found guilty. It does seem like a compromise verdict, but it just seems like a strange compromise. But,
Yeah.
That's the system, and we all live with it and we accept it. It's going to be a really tough time for Nicole Burdett. And I'm sure it's a bittersweet moment for Williams as well. I mean, they were law partners and did a lot of work together, and were very successful. And so he might have a little bit of survivor's guilt at some level on this. But also to comment on a political matter not related to the case in the sense of the indictment being politicized, but I also agree that he's going to get a bounce. And from the time he took office more than a year and a half ago, that office has kind of been under a cloud. Now that cloud has been lifted. Yeah. And Eric, you and I have been around long enough to remember that another local district attorney, two other district attorneys, Harry Connick and Jim Garrison, were both accused of federal crimes, and both of them were also acquitted. Yeah. So the federal government, while it has a 97% conviction rate on tax cases, it has a 0% conviction rate on New Orleans district attorneys.
And Clancy, I'm sure you were like when Mike Pearlstein and I were sitting here and we heard the 4 counts come down. And again, these are separate counts that Nicole Burdett was convicted of from the 10 that she and Jason Williams were facing together. I mean, I'm going, oh, this can't be good for Jason, or for his case. But then they started reading the verdicts, and they all came in not guilty.
Yeah, again, I think I believe, and forgive me, I wasn't in the courtroom, but I believe that the counts that she was convicted on are separate and apart.
They are separate, yes.
The conspiracy issues and things that involve her and Jason Williams. And it probably, I'd have to go back and check, but it might well be that those 4 counts are actually present in if you recall, they did a superseding indictment against her.
Right.
And it might be those counts. That,
well,
I'll have to check.
And I was thinking, because when they read those guilty verdicts first, I can't imagine what it was like for Jason Williams sitting there thinking, oh no, if they got her on this, are they going to get me?
Well, as Harry, again, to quote Harry, I think he nailed it. He said Jason needs to perhaps make a novena or say a thank you prayer to the patron saint of criminal defendants, whoever that might be. He's I think in some ways first of all, we all know he had both of these defendants had excellent legal representation.
Yes.
I think the government's lawyers looked like the third string. And if nothing else, and I'm not saying that Williams was guilty, but when you consider what they were alleging in the indictment, they didn't come close to driving those things home in court. And I think the defense made a very good point when they said, look, he's working this out. It was almost a sense of jury nullification as regards to Jason Williams, because they just didn't want to convict him if he's already starting to pay back that money. And Harry Connick was a popular DA when he got indicted, and Jim Garrison is a legendary figure who took over his own defense halfway through the trial. And that this may not be relevant to a lot of your viewers, but I mean, to put this in a perspective, it is not easy to obtain a conviction against a popular a political figure.
And I think that's why Jason Williams was saying from the beginning he thought this was politically motivated. But when you look at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I mean, whether you like it or not, they go for wins and hate losses. This is a big loss for them as far as Jason Williams is concerned, but they can claim a win on Nicole Burdett.
Yeah, but let's face it, the federal prosecutors are trophy hunters.
Yep.
They were gunning for Jason Williams, and Nicole Burdett herself had described herself as collateral damage, and they cannot count this as a win. This is a loss for them. But obviously for Nicole Burdett, it's a bigger loss, and I'm sure her lawyers are already contemplating the basis for an appeal.
Yeah, and again, there was a lot of talk that Williams might take a plea deal or Burdett might take a plea deal. It was not in their best interest to do this. It was better, at least for them, to roll the dice, because if they take a plea deal, they're going to lose their law license. He would lose his seat as a DA. If he goes to court, at least he has a chance.
Well, it really depends on what the plea deal is. If the plea deal had been for a misdemeanor, they would not have lost their license.
That probably wouldn't have been the deal, though.
Yeah, no, and that's not the deal that the feds were willing to offer, obviously. It's at this point, it's Monday morning quarterbacking.
Sure.
It worked out great for Jason Williams, but it worked out disastrously for Nicole Burdett. So, at least at this stage, now the process allows her to appeal, and she's got two more layers of appeals that she can use. But, we'll just have to see how that plays out.
Well, and I think you're right.
But in terms of the city of New Orleans and politics, I think Jason Williams is going to come back stronger politically than he was, certainly than he has been since he got elected. And I think he has the potential to be a very serious political force, as he was already before the indictment. In New Orleans politics.
Well, and he really never showed any cracks in his armor throughout this entire process. He was here on the morning show a while back, and I had asked him if because he was talking about the crime in the city and the things he's facing, and I asked him, I said, is focusing on your federal trial taking away a lot of time and thought for you? And he said, no. He said, my time is just toward looking at crime here in New Orleans.
Yeah, and frankly, it's almost as if when he goes back to the office, it's almost as if he is having his first day there all over again, because when he started, there was under this cloud, and now that cloud has been lifted. It's going to be a whole new day for him. He can now focus all of his time, all of his attention on the DA's job, and you really have to be naive to think that he was not able to, or to think that he was able to focus all of his attention on the DA's office. But now we're really going to see what kind of DA he is.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there was a cloud on him because he was elected while he was under indictment. Yes,
so which in some ways was a vindication. People in New Orleans obviously believe you really are innocent until proven guilty, and it turns out he was not proven guilty. And again, I'm not saying that he was guilty or should have been convicted, but the federal government did not put on a very good case. They really didn't. They got out-lawyered at many turns, and they just didn't prove it. I mean, the jury, to come back not guilty on all counts, there was not even a sniff of a compromise as regards to Jason Williams. So the jury just didn't buy it.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of a stunning day today. And what were your thoughts? And I mean, because we all had thoughts about what would happen in this trial. Were you surprised by the outcome?
No. I think, again, as Harry Rosenberg said, I'm a lawyer, but Harry was an assistant U.S. attorney.
He was U.S. attorney.
Far better than I. I'm sorry, he was a U.S. attorney. I'm sorry. But he, when he said that taking 16 hours to deliberate, that's not, when you have 11 counts, I think, against Jason. 10
against Williams.
10 survived, right, because one was thrown out. But initially 11, then 10. But then also multiple counts against her. The jury took its time and looked at each count and made its decision. And I think that's the only thing we can surmise by this verdict. I was not willing to take a guess on what the verdict was going to be. But it was, put it this way, it was a gutsy move by the lawyers, by the defense lawyers, and at least for Jason Williams, it paid off because he certainly could have taken the stand, and she could have taken the stand, but they said, no, this case is so poor, we don't need to put on a defense. And that was correct in terms of Jason, but, it's something that I'm sure the lawyer, Ms. Burdett's lawyers are perhaps rethinking. But, again, I think they're already talking about and thinking about what the basis of their appeal might be.
All right, Clancy. Clancy, thank you very much. We appreciate your thoughts on this. Let's go back out to Erica and David outside the federal court building.
Hey, Eric. Well, we have not seen Jason Williams or Nicole Burdett, but David Hammer, you were just speaking with Nicole Burdett's attorney, Mike Magner. We don't expect to hear a statement at some point this afternoon, maybe later today.
No, well, I just asked him if he was going to come out and make a statement. His client obviously devastated that she's been convicted on all the separate 4 counts against her, and he said that he's not going to be coming out and making a statement at this time, but that he will have a statement later today. We don't know what form that will take, whether it will be a written statement or if he will stand in front of the cameras, but they're not ready to comment at this time. And usually when a defendant is convicted in federal court, there's a long processing situation going on where they go in and meet with probation and things to set up for their upcoming sentencing, and her sentencing is scheduled for September 30th. So that is probably happening for her. Jason Williams, on the other hand, free to go.
Right, and we can't say for sure right now if he is still inside the courthouse or if he has left. He hasn't been using the front entrance for the last few days.
That's the problem.
There was a death threat that NOPD was investigating, so they've been allowing him to use a private side entrance where we can't really see if he's coming or going. So we're not sure at this point if he is still here. We know he'll make some sort of statement at some point. We don't know if it'll be in person on camera or maybe it'll be a written statement that we'll get in an email. But at some point we will hear from him. We just don't know if we're going to see him today as walking out of court to offer any thoughts or share, how he's feeling.
Right, exactly. That would be the thing, was to hear how he's feeling. Mixed emotions that he showed in court, obviously, that his partner, his business partner, and one of the attorneys in his office, Nicole Burdett, found guilty on very serious criminal federal charges, while he obviously is relieved that he is not guilty and able to move forward as the district attorney of Orleans Parish. And you'd have to imagine that the response over at the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office would be one of relief as well. I did get a statement from the District Attorney's Office yesterday saying that regardless of whatever the verdict would be, that they would move forward with the important work of prosecuting crimes in the city of New Orleans.
And we're hearing from some council members as well who say they are also ready to move forward. J.P. Morrell tweeted just a while ago saying that justice was served. Now we can put this case behind us and have our district attorney return to focusing on addressing violent crime in the city. And as we mentioned a while ago, Helena Moreno also tweeted saying proper and fair treatment was delivered by this jury and justice was served today. I'm gratified that we can now all continue to move forward on the important work ahead and focus on the public safety of our city. And so now, as Jason Williams will walk out a free man, he will also return as district attorney and continue his work.
Yeah, and I talked to Harry Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney in the early 90s, who reminded me that a sitting DA was last prosecuted in federal court in 1990. That was Harry Connick Sr. He was charged with racketeering, and he was found not guilty on all counts and continued as DA for several more years. But that cloud stayed over him for the rest of his time in office. So that's going to be the interesting thing, too. Will Jason Williams be able to move past this, just the feeling about it, because he was charged with federal crimes, even though he was found not guilty on all of them?
And as we've mentioned as well, he is still going to have to address some of this with the IRS. And while he is found not guilty of intentionally conspiring to defraud the government, he still has to pay off some of these basically these fees that he now has, because his taxes were not filed properly for 5 years.
And think about this too, his ex-wife and 2 of his former attorneys have been pleading guilty to much more minor offenses, actually misdemeanors, of failure to file tax returns in order to be witnesses in this case and to help the government in their case. They're facing now stiffer punishment than he, obviously, because he faces no punishment because he was found not guilty.
So it'll be interesting to see kind of the next steps and hear kind of his Jason Williams' reaction. But as you mentioned, I'm sure he has very mixed emotions at this point.
Yeah, the biggest emotion that he showed was sadness for his partner, Nicole Burdett, and you know, again, bear hugged her and put his head against her head, and as she was sobbing audibly because she knows that she's potentially facing some serious prison time.
All right, and Eric, can we toss it back to you in the studio? We'll continue waiting out here for any sort of updates.
All right, Eric and David, thank you very much. Excellent job out there. We will have continuing coverage on this coming up in our 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock newscasts. We are trying to get comment from Jason Williams, but a big win for him in federal court today, a big loss for the prosecution, and a tough day for Nicole Burdett, who was convicted on 4 counts, separate counts from the 10 against both her and Jason Williams. That'll wrap it up for us right now. We'll take you back to the regular programming now.
This has been breaking news from Channel 4's Eyewitness News. For the latest updates, go to WWLTV.com, the Channel 4 app, or our social media pages.
Jonathan, what do you do?
I go to San Diego State. I'm a pre-med student. I'm hoping to follow in the footsteps of my father. He's currently a doctor right now. He went through the military first, and then he did it the right way. The long way, but he's there, so.
Well, best of luck to you on that.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So here's your deal. We have curtain number 1, or you can take the small box, right? Simple decision, curtain or the box. Now, the thing I will tell you, that at least one of them has a deal worth over $6,000.